So you were sort of, working away PR, property management. This is pre-social media days. You're slogging away
Yes.
at this blogging and styling thing on the side. And then
Yes.
you sort of get to this moment where I don't know how the two of you met, but there was an opportunity for you to do that cover with Ruby Rose. So you did the
Yes.
shoot. It's that dress from Green with Envy. It's sold out
Yes.
almost
Yes.
immediately. What was that aha moment like for you in terms of in your brain and thinking about your future? What was that like?
At the time, it was amazing because when you're at that point, I think I'd been maybe 2 years because I freelanced for 3 years while I was working at Stockland. So I reckon that was right in the middle or just after. So it's more than just over halfway. So it was kind of that this is working. That this strategy felt like the right thing for me. Because where that was working as well, just to take a step back, was because there wasn't social media and Instagram at that point was starting to take off. And I was sort of sharing all the behind the scenes because I wasn't seen as, the real thing because I wasn't a stylist working in magazines. And back then that was a really big deal. Like it was like, digital, what's that about? And I'd already been, because I'd been overseas, I'd seen in New York and stuff, that was all that people were doing. They were like magazines, like, so I was just trying to back myself in that the marketing part of me was right. And so for me, it was a really great thing because it was this aha moment of continuity where it was like, okay, so I'm the conduit between the customer and the brand. That's what I can bring to the table. That's how I can get people inspired and get them to see different things in a different way and show them how to wear it. And, when there were these opportunities with, amazing talent, you go, well, this is great. And I think for me, Ruby Rose was definitely kind of the first. I'd done some, without speaking down to like soapy stars or anything, I'd done a few of those people at that point, but she was certainly the one that was the most well known. It was the cover and then there was the bread inside. So, and then obviously she's gone on to do amazing things overseas. And ironically, I had to think about this moment more recently in not January gone, the January before that, where she was back down for the tennis for ING. And Australian Open has that big ING party before the tennis. And Crown got in touch with me and said, would you dress her again? I was like, oh my God, I'd love to. So there was this full circle where it's like the person that I don't even know if she knew, because even when you catch up, you've still got to be, a bit cool and collected. You don't want to be like, hey, remember me? Because she's worked with like Brad Garrett.
Hey, you made my life.
Yeah. But it was a great experience then, and it was an even better experience there. And I think she was somebody that I really was like, that's such an example of someone who's come so far but remained exactly the same. Like she didn't have a big head. She was so appreciative. She was amazing. And so those are the moments that you really value when you say to yourself, I really love my job. And that moment for me, it was a big moment. There was no question. And it definitely opened doors in terms of the brands that I could work with and the talent that I was working with. But also, I think the most important thing is it just gave me the confidence that what I'm doing is right and I'm working towards the right thing. Because I think that's the biggest battle we all have is with ourselves. And I think that's the thing we're all experiencing at the moment. Everything that, not in all cases, but in a lot, the way we do things is very different. And it might be that your career, particularly in fashion at the moment, anyone in fashion is really kind of taking a bit of a hit. We're having to think differently, the way we showcase things, the way we shoot things, who we shoot with, what we sell, etc. But it might be, the office worker at home, like my husband, who's had his job security is there, but every interaction he has is like this. It's over Zoom, and he goes from our bedroom and lounge area to the office, and that's his day. So that is different. And so I think what it does do is when you have those little slight wins, it just gives you that confidence to keep going. And that's what that definitely did for me, for sure.
Yeah, they become cornerstone moments in
Absolutely.
your life. Like I think when you look at your, I said to you before, I've got like 6 pages of notes, and you look at those specific.
I just hope they're interesting notes, Jordan. I hope they're interesting.
They definitely are. I mean, that you can see that as I've had that. I remember there was the first like big name local interview I did was with Jeff Kennett, and I was like, oh wow, this is okay.
I've made it.
not that I've made it, but like, okay, I am what I'm spending all these hours on, which makes absolutely no money and takes up all this time, actually it's worth it. And
Yes,
people are
100%.
interested in it. And it's hard to, that's the hardest thing about all of this stuff you do. The biggest deal is just to stick with it a lot of the time. Most people just give up.
Absolutely. It's so true. And I think often too, like I've been asked, oh, how did this feel when you did this or this person? And the thing is, I think when you're on this train, you kind of do it and then you're thinking about the next thing. How do I top that? What is the thing I'm going to do now? How can I elevate? Because I think in a lot of ways, and I related to this, I remember a stylist overseas saying it on a show or something and said, you're only as good as your last job. And I take that with a grain of salt because I do think that's the case, but I also think that when you've done the work, you've got to back yourself in that you've built a solid reputation, or if you've got a brand, you've built a brand up, there's trust, there's loyalty, you know, because even during this current climate, you know, back step to March, you sort of go, oh, what does this mean? How am I going to be relevant? What are the things I've got to do? But then you've also got to trust, you know what? You haven't stopped. Like maybe what you've done is enough, and just keep being authentic, because I think that's the other thing I'm finding. And, you know, I touched on it before we started recording, was that at the moment we've got these little moments of life outside, right? And unfortunately it's on this. So we're looking, and I'm guilty of it. You show the best bits of it. So I feel like you've just got to kind of take things with a grain of salt, but go on your journey and celebrate those wins for yourself. And that's definitely the process I'm in now. And I know if I could go back to that person, the girl that was trying to build up so much, not to talk about myself in the third person, but I would just say to her, like, just stop and enjoy this. This is good. You're doing well. You're getting there. Because often the fear of it going away was overwhelming, you know?
Yeah, and, that was one of the things you spoke about it on, God, what podcast was it? I feel like it was on Shameless. I was having listened to
I shared a lot.
Yeah.
I shared a lot. So Shameless was at a time too where it wasn't dissimilar to right now, where we're on the brink. Because I remember when we went in and we did it, it was like, I'm glad we're doing this today because I think we'll be in trouble if we're in the same room tomorrow. So it was like that. So, you know, that fear of this is different. Like I remember when we walked in, we were making sure we had space between us. Like it was very uncertain. And I remember thinking, there's no point, for lack of a better, excuse my language, but there's no point talking shit. We need to be really open and honest about where this is and where we're at. And so I definitely took that approach in that interview. So there's probably something bit dark and dirty I mentioned. I can't remember. No, but that makes me vulnerable because I was that day.
I like that. This is something I was speaking to Jade about off air. I hate it when you're in interviews and they'll read out a question and you'll say something, you give them an answer and they're like, okay, cool. And then they go on to the next question. I think that there's just so much loose change that is left on the table in these conversations. And a lot of the time that tone is set by the host, not the guest. And so that's why I did like that podcast. It was really useful for my own research. And I remember thinking, like, what does Lana think now in hindsight about those moments in terms of it? Like, do you think it's just, I feel like it's near impossible to look back at those moments and realize what you were in at the moment and sort of apply yourself to back then. It's just, I don't know, it just doesn't feel possible.
No, and it doesn't. And, you know, I'm really glad we're speaking today because I think a few days ago, you know, it was feeling really bleak. Like, okay, wow, the year's over. We're going to be like this till the end of the year. And we're not. This is temporary. Like, I don't know that for sure, but like, I'll roll a dice and say maybe not. You know, I think maybe we could be in the same room at a distance, but I think, do you know what I mean? I'm not somebody that walks around going, I've done this, I've dressed this person, look how great I am. It's not my style, because I've always been that person that if you do well, your work will speak for yourself or for itself. And my belief, and maybe it's because I did come from a corporate background, is that nobody's going to write on your, you know, tombstone one day. Wow, she nailed that red carpet. That was awesome. They're going to talk about you.
Yeah.
And so my belief across all of my businesses is that, you know, the way you treat someone is about making them feel good. Like you want someone to feel something.
Yeah.
So, and for me, if I could try to sort of conceptualize all of those things right now, where it does feel impossible, like I'm never going to get to do it again, I just wish that perhaps, and I say this to anybody who's coming up, is just enjoy those moments as they're happening and celebrate the wins. And it's not that I didn't, but I think I'm just so much more appreciative now that I've had those experiences. I'm appreciative that, you know, that I've been able to work with the level of talent that I have. And someone said to me recently, do you think that it was luck? And I don't. I worked my ass off. And
because that stuff compounds way too much. It's just not luck.
Yeah, I know. And there were too many good things that happened at once that were because maybe, and not necessarily also because I was maybe the best person for the job in some instances. You don't know, like I have never gone around, like I find it really, I'm not comfortable when people say leading stylists or leading Australia's lead. Like, I'm like, who's judging this, right? Because I know there's some amazing people. It's very, don't get me wrong, very complimented by it. And it's not that I don't have that self-belief in me, but like, where's there to go from leading? Like, where are you meant to go from there? Yeah. Whereas for me, I'm always like, how do we get better? How do we be more successful? How do we do something amazing? Like, and I think for me, there was a stage there for a period where, because when I first started, there weren't a lot of stylists doing that, like sharing what they were doing behind the scenes. That it was very sort of old school. We do the work, we wait for it to be published. We don't say it. It's about the designer. It's not about us. And for me, it's not that it was ever not about those things, but I was like, but why can't it be about all of us? Like we're all doing the work. We're all collaborating. So that felt like the right thing for me at that time. But I think even now, like you can easily look and go, well, all these people are doing this. But for me, I think when I really kind of hit that peak was where I stopped looking or worrying about what everyone else was doing. And I just worried about competing with myself. I'm very competitive, but not with other people. If we're playing sport, I'm like, let's go. It's the old tennis girl in me, all the way my sim. Like, I'm like, I want to beat you. I want to be number one. Number two does not count. I went to a high school, a secondary college in Essendon where we danced and we did Rocker Stedfords. And I remember them saying second place, St. Columbus College. And even now, as I say that, I can feel like my guts falling out of me. Like it was awful because number two was not good enough. So, which probably presents a whole bunch of other stuff that's not right and not normal, but oh well, that's part of my makeup, right?
I think that's part of that immigrant mentality.
Yeah, you don't do two. Who does two? Everyone wants to be one. But I don't tell my kids that, right? Because I want them to, I've got a saying with Ava at the moment going, you're being the best when you try. Because when you try, you're the best. Because you're not always going to be the best. That's just not how life is, unfortunately. But success for me then was deemed, okay, well, competing with myself. What have I done previously? I've got to nail that. Yeah. Okay, I'm dressing this person. I've done this many people. How do I make all those people amazing instead of just 3 of them? How do I get the one that's not known more known? How do I, like all of those kind of conversations. So once I did that, that's when I really started to see the fruits of my efforts. Yeah. Because I think what happens with Instagram or in any industry really, it could be that there's somebody in the next thing over, that maybe the boss is being a bit more kind to or taking them out for lunch and you're missing out. If you get yourself caught up in that race and you're looking back to see what the other person's doing, you're not focusing on you. So for me, I find it interesting if anybody over the journey, and people have said, oh, are you worried about this person? Are you worrying about that? It's like, I wouldn't be where I was if I was worrying about everybody else.
I cannot underline this enough. Like I feel like in the last 18 months, I've developed this and it takes a long time to get there. And that may be as simple as looking at your week and thinking I have to do this or that thing that will mean the business, whatever, will improve in some way. But I remember I used to always compare to other shows, other podcasts, and the moment I think I can't remember the last time I looked at our downloads. Obviously, have to give it to our creative director when someone asks for a media kit, but I just don't care anymore. It's been quite amazing because we've got some of the best guests that we've ever had in the history of the show, because I'm just focused on that, and that's all that really matters.
And you know why? Because that's authentic to you. You can tell when you're talking to me and you've done your homework, you're enjoying that process, and now the process is unpacking it. And that's why people listen. That's why people download. And for me, I felt like I wasn't ever trying to do things that were about somebody paying me and going, look at this. It was genuinely, I loved it. And even with my brand now, if I won't wear it, I won't put my name on it.
Yes.
And I think that whole conversation, and what I realize now, and if it's any, especially some of the younger listeners that it might be tuning in, is, you know, when somebody attacks you or goes you or trolls you or questions you and it's wrong, or you feel like it's wrong, they're seeing something that then they're seeing something in you they don't recognize in themselves. And that's just a fact. I wish I had have learned that younger. And then your reaction to that, and I think especially during this pandemic, I wasn't familiar with Brené Brown. I don't know if you've seen her thing on Netflix.
Yeah.
But there was something that I wished that I could have shaken myself about 5 years ago, maybe even a little bit less than that. And there's this thing that she says about feedback and being in the arena. And if you're in the arena and you're putting yourself out there, and you're in there, and you've got to expect when you're doing that, you're going to get punched up. And the arena might be, you know, that you're a manager in your company, and so that people may not like you, or that you're, you know, putting your name on something like I am, or putting yourself out there like you are. You know, there are going to be people that are going to have feedback. But what you've got to learn to do is take on the criticism from someone else who's in the arena, as opposed to somebody just telling you how you could do it better when they're not doing it. It's like, you're in the cheap seats. I'm not interested in your feedback, period. And I think for me, particularly in my job, you know, initially, particularly from a styling perspective, I always took on the approach that I always took on the responsibility of how someone looked more than they did, because you're paying me for my opinion. So I'm going to be more fearful. And what I realized was when the client and I were determined to have this moment and go, you know what, do we love it? That was the thing that was almost made it unstoppable, because when you're feeling yourself, you own that, and that made you untouchable, kind of.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I know that probably sounds a bit deep, but I felt like when you're owning it, it's like, even if there is feedback, it just washes away.